All marriages end either by death or divorce. And the law says something about what's going to happen at the end of the marriage, both when it happens because of death after many decades of happy marriage, or because it happens in divorce. The laws about death and divorce are totally different. So a prenup steps in and replaces what the statute or the case law says will happen at the end of the marriage when someone dies, or at the end of the marriage when someone divorces. Talking about a prenup is really important because most people don't know what those statutes are. Most lawyers don't know what happens at the end of a marriage when someone dies or when someone gets divorced unless they practice in that particular area. So understanding the laws around the division of assets, the laws around alimony and child support, that's a really important thing to know if divorce is in your future. And knowing what the spouse's right of election is, that's really important to know in the event your marriage ends because someone dies. When you get married, from an estate planning perspective, all your assets, regardless of where they come from, are your assets. It doesn't really matter if they're marital assets or separate assets. If you have money that you inherited, if you have money that you earned, if you have money that you won in the lottery, it's the money that you have when you die that counts. And your spouse has a right to a portion of that unless you sign an agreement, a prenuptial or postnuptial agreement that says something different. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, you might want to do it to give yourself some flexibility about how to leave your estate. And you might want to do it to protect, and your parents, your family of origin, might want to protect their inheritance. So a lot of people put a prenup in place when they're expecting or have received a large inheritance in order to make sure that that inheritance continues down the generations in one family. I think that every engaged couple should have a prenup conversation, whether or not they end up signing a prenuptial agreement. Here's why. It is really important to talk about money as part of the marital relationship. If you cannot talk about money, you're much more likely to get divorced than if you can. In fact, it turns out, statistically speaking, that people who have prenups are less likely to get divorced than those who do not. And that's because those couples can have some difficult conversations and survive and thrive and become more resilient through those conversations. So how do you think about credit? How do you think about saving? How do you think about paying for your children's college education? That's so much more important a conversation than what color your napkins are going to be at the reception, don't you think? Lots of times people don't like to think about or talk about a prenup because it seems kind of cynical or planning for the end of the marriage before it's even begun. But all marriages end either by death or divorce, so talking about planning during the marriage makes a lot of sense. It also makes a lot of sense to plan for the end while you love each other, even if it does end in divorce. You buy life insurance, you have an estate plan, you know you're going to die, you know your marriage is going to end. Why not plan for that in a really thoughtful, protective, and proactive way? If you have any questions about prenuptial agreements or postnuptial agreements and how they might help you, please do not hesitate to contact us at Miller Law.